This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Joining us today is Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources. Hi Ben, how are you doing?
Pretty exhausted after a very intense weekend with Kavango, Mark.
A very intense weekend. Okay, well, we'll come on to that in a moment with regards to the placing and, of course, the recent news. But first of all, just on the general market, what's your feeling? It's not looking so pretty out there today or the end of last week. But then again, you've got Kavango seems to be bucking the trend today.
Yeah, well, we've obviously just done this placing and we've announced the IOCG model. I know we're going to talk about the placing in a minute. It's definitely vindicated our decision from Friday. It's looking pretty brutal out there at the moment. You know, it's a sea of quite horrible and harsh red. Outlook's looking pretty grim. Inflation's up. I think we're in for a bit of a rough ride over the next period. But then for people in our space with metal prices where they are, I think the outlook is looking phenomenal. So whether or not this is a buying opportunity just yet, I don't know. You know, it might be a time to start averaging into the market. But I think the minerals exploration space, Mark, I'm so bullish on the fundamentals of it. I think, the next leg up is going to be a really exciting time in this sector.
Indeed, the signs do seem to point to that. Okay, well, let's take a look at the news that's been released from Kavango today, this IOCG systems. So, of course, you are mostly targeting nickel and copper, but these systems can host lots of other minerals as well, such as gold and uranium. So can you just explain IOCG systems for us?
Well, how long have you got? I've been learning a lot about them over the last 6 months. They're obviously incredibly complicated. They're also extremely large. So IOCGs are synonymous with extremely large scale metal deposits. And what's really interesting for us in the Great Red Spot is that this is a second mineralisation target that we're going for on top of, as you quite rightly say, our nickel copper primary target, which we're looking for in the Karoo and Proterozoic gabbros. The idea that there might have been an IOCG model in the Great Red Spot was first floated about 25 years ago. As our shareholders will know, Jeremy Brett was heavily involved in exploration 20 years ago with the Canadian firms that were looking at the Great Red Spot and the last people to do significant exploration there. And the idea was even back then that there might well be an IOCG style mineralisation model appropriate to this, but technology wasn't quite there at the time to be able to do the sort of things that we can do today in terms of getting a clearer view of what lies below the surface at depth. So the model itself is very different from the magmatic sulfide model. So where magmatic sulfides are based around effectively magma coming to surface and bringing the mineralisation with it, the IOCG model is much more about a hydrothermal alteration event. So in very, very simple terms, and I mean, we're going to be doing a lot of marketing around this and sort of educate our shareholders as to what this means. But very long story short, it basically means that the mineralization is transported through essentially very hot water and then overprinted over the existing host rocks. So you have a host rock of whatever that might be. So for example, Olympic Dam in southern Australia is hosted in granites. But the mineralization is sort of effectively transported into these host rocks and then overprinted sort of on top of them. Now, a geologist would probably turn in his grave sort of hearing that description because it's a massive sort of oversimplification. But we will be producing sort of a lot more material on this just to explain sort of how these IOCG systems work, but also how it differs from our magmatic sulfide model that we're also looking for. So it's a very, very exciting development because both are very much still in play, and we're really, really looking forward to the next steps in the Great Red Spot.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned this comparison to Olympic Dam there, but also the RNS does allude to this as well. What is making you and the team think that it does have similarities to Olympic Dam? But also, let me ask you, what are the potential risks here that it isn't, that you're being led down the wrong path?
I think that's an excellent question, the way you frame that. So let's talk about the risks, because of course, it would be very easy for a company like ours just to promote the hell out of something like this. Yeah, we've got an Olympic Dam. I mean, Olympic Dam is, I think it's either the world's or one of the world's largest mineral deposits. So for us to sort of start talking freely about something like this would frankly just be irresponsible. So what we're looking at here is there will inevitably be geological differences. So I mentioned already that Olympic Dam is hosted within granite. We don't know what the host rocks are at the depth horizon that we're looking at yet, but we expect they will be geologically different. However, in terms of the evidence that we pulled together, first of all, we have data from airborne magnetic data and ground-based gravity surveys that Kavango has run. The results from those two separate surveys, which are obviously completely different data sets, they coincide with one another, and they coincide with one another in a way that's very, very similar to the gravity and magnetic models of Olympic Dam. The signatures that are being given off are also very similar. So this 31 milligal gravity anomaly that we have in the Great Red Spot, I mean, that's significant. That's telling us that there is something quite sizable, quite substantial that's happened in this area, very much as to what you see in Olympic Dam. But the edge that we have, and it's worth just saying that back in the mid-1970s, Olympic Dam was drilled on the basis of this combined magnetic and gravity anomaly, or anomalies, I should say, plural. The edge that we now have is that we have these AMT surveys. So the AMT surveys, they give us a much more comprehensive view of what's actually happening subsurface. And we're really looking forward to releasing the images that we have from our AMT surveys, because we think we've identified what could be very interesting alteration zones and large scale as well. And then finally, we're looking at the shape of this thing. So the actual shape of the magnetic anomaly, and again, this will all be in images that we'll put out in the public domain. Even sort of the untrained eye can see that on the same scale, the Great Red Spot and the Olympic Dam have this sort of very distinctive crown-like features with limbs reaching up to surface. And they just simply look like each other. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Now, the other interesting lead that we have is the magnetite. So we encountered magnetite in hole KSZ DD001. And one of the things that we'll be educating people about will be the sort of the idealized view of what an IOCG model looks like. Well, magnetite is potentially quite an important component of an IOCG because it can provide part of the iron oxide or hematite as well, which is another form of iron oxide. And we've got this physical evidence that we've got magnetite in one of the upper limbs of the crown, but also from the models that we've created, it intensifies sort of the closer into the surface that you get. So these are all sort of leads at this stage. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's four separate sets of circumstantial evidence that are aligning in the same direction, which is why we're so excited about this.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing those images as and when they are released in the public domain, and that crown-like feature you talk about, comparing the similarities there to Olympic Dam. I'm sure we'll be talking about that, me and you, at some point, so looking forward to doing that. Can I ask you, Ben, you've been working on this for around 6 months now. Why have you not come out with this earlier? Why is it only today that the market's hearing of this?
Yeah, well, look, we've touched on that we were working on this second mineralisation style. We wanted to keep sort of shareholders informed as to what we were actually doing because we know that we've been quite quiet. We wanted to take a prudent approach. I mean, you just asked me about the risks involved. I think had we sort of started firing from the hip last November, when Kavango first became aware of this theory after we sort of hit this magnetite, it would have been very easy for us just to run out and start, screaming from the rooftops, IOCG, IOCG, IOCG. But that's not our style these days. And I've said to our shareholders consistently that I know that we've had a bit of a period of quiet, but you do just need to wait. You just need to give us time to get on with our work and crash test these ideas. For us to come out with the potential comparison with an Olympic Dam style mineralisation. So we're not saying it's a direct analogue because there clearly will be differences. It's just been a lot of work for us to crash test this theory and have complete confidence, have as much confidence as we could have before we put it into the public domain. Now that we've done that, now that we've reached that threshold, there's going to be a lot more information we'll be publishing. We're going to be doing more AMT work. We'll be talking about sort of the economic viability of what we're looking at potentially. And it's a really exciting development. So now we'll start talking about it a lot more regularly, but we just needed that period of time to get ourselves up to speed so that we would have confidence in what we would present to the market.
You did tell me that you were working on this in the background as well as drilling going on at Ditau. So as soon as drilling is completed at Ditau, you can almost go back and carry on, can you?
Well, we can do potentially. I mean, we're looking obviously at keeping this rig in the field. As we said before, Mark, I mean, look, whether we go straight back to the KSZ North or we go to the KSZ South or we continue at Dissau, we simply need to see what happens over the next month or so with the Dissau campaign. But our goal is definitely to keep the rig in the field. In terms of drilling these IOCG targets, they are quite deep. So we've talked recently about making the KSZ partner ready. We've got some ideas around that, what we can, or the type or the profile of partner that we might like to bring in. Sort of, smaller companies who can then work together to put together a much more substantial drill budget to make this viable. So we've got some ideas that we'll be talking about in more detail, in the coming weeks and months. And then, of course, we've got the B1 conductor. There's more TDEM work that's happening there. Obviously, we need to see what the results are, but I think sort of our decisions will be influenced by the TDEM campaigns, which obviously are looking for the closer to surface nickel copper sulfide bodies as well.
Okay. Well, at the start of the interview, you did tell me you had a busy weekend. I guess that is with regards to the placing that happened over the weekend, fairly rapid doing that over the weekend there. You've raised £750,000 to support expanding your exploration programme. Now, I did host you on an event just a week or so ago, and you said there was no placing. So what has changed, Ben?
Yeah, well, look, I know that this is the part of the rubbish part of my job. I know what I said 10 days ago, and what I said 10 days ago was completely true. This is a very fast-moving market. Now, this placing came about. I went to see our broker on Friday. I was discussing with him a number of things that were happening within the company, and he said he could raise us money at this point. Now, there's another dynamic in the background which I need to do a bit more work on first before we talk about this. It's not inside information, but it's an observation of mine related to market dynamics. Our share price was under quite a bit of pressure, and we suspected something was happening in the background that we just needed to nip in the bud immediately. And I know I'm being a bit mysterious about that at this stage, but I'm not quite ready to talk about it in full detail. In terms of the placing itself, as I say, look, we were offered the money. And we said, well, actually, at this level, we are fully funded for the current work programme, which is completely true and remain true. But obviously, Kavango is a business with 14,500 square kilometres. We can also expand our programmes as well. With the infrastructure we've now built in country, we can really put extra funds to really good use and go and do some real damage out there looking to make these discoveries. As it turned out, the placing has gone brilliantly, and we were offered nearly £1.5 million. And I know companies like to talk about heavily oversubscribed placings. Normally, it's complete rubbish. In this instance, everybody got scaled back by, I think it was 44%. So it's been a phenomenal vote of confidence for us. We've kept the dilution to a minimum, so we didn't sort of just go and grab all of the money that was there, because we think we've got serious potential over the coming months to deliver some outsized returns from where we are now. I think we've been excessively punished by what is a pretty more poor market, which we just talked about at the beginning, and we feel very confident now to move forward. So I do understand the optics. I know how this looks, and I'm the one who's obviously got to bear the brunt of that, but this is how everything came together, and I will be explaining more about the context of my decision on Friday. I've just got to wait a couple of days. There's some things that I'm just putting together, but I will be talking about it publicly.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ben. I look forward to catching up with you as and when appropriate and those images come out, and we can discuss them in more detail. But for now, Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. And let's do a video when we have the images, because there really is a lot to talk about. And we'll get Jeremy on the line as well.
Indeed. Sounds good, Ben. If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.